And what is it you want to show, Dad? Well, in the last year or two, there have been breakdowns. As you say, it's an old planet. We've got to expect breakdowns. But they've been coming more frequently, and they would seem almost uniformly to be the result of human error. Well, isn't that reasonable? Yes, of course, within limits. But what do you think of the locations? The map had lit up with bright little red markings. Ah, they seem to be evenly spread. Exactly, Rach, and that's what's interesting. One would expect that the older sections of Trantor, the longest domed sections, would have the most decayed infrastructure and would be more liable to events requiring quick human decisions and laying the groundwork for possible human error. What I think it means, Rach, is that the breakdowns are not of natural origin, but are deliberately caused and spread out in this fashion to affect as many people as possible, thus creating widespread dissatisfaction. The map went out and the lights went on. Seldon returned the sphere to his pocket. Who would be doing all this, Dad? A few days ago, I received a report of a murder in the Y sector. Well, that's not unusual, even though Y isn't one of your really lawless sectors. There must be lots of murders there every day. Seldon shook his head. This one was unusual. The man had been knifed, but unskillfully. He was alive when found, just barely. He had time to gasp out one word before he died, and that word was chief. That roused a certain curiosity, and he was actually identified. Some worthy officer managed to dig up the fact that he was an old Geranimite. His name was Kaspelov, and he is well known to have been one of the intimates of Laskin Geranum. Rach frowned. Do you suspect another Geranimite conspiracy, Dad? There aren't any Geranimites around anymore. Geranum's right-hand man was Gambaldine Namarti. We have no record of Namarti's death, no record of his having left Trantor, no record of his life over the last decade or so. Of course, Namarti may be dead. That would be the easiest explanation, but he may not be. What do we do about it? It's what you will do about it, Rach. I need more evidence, and I want you to find it for me. You're still quite young. You're strong. You're a better Heliconian twister than I ever was. And you're smart. Mind you now, I don't want you to risk your life. No heroism, no daring-do. I couldn't face your mother if anything happened to you. Just find out what you can, whether the infrastructure breakdowns are of human manufacturers, I think they are, and, far more important still, if they are deliberately caused. What else the conspirators plan to do. It seems to me that they must have plans for some major coup, and if so, I must know what that will be. Rach said cautiously, Do you have some kind of plan to get me started? Yes, indeed, Rach. I want you to go down to the area of Y where Kaspelov was killed. Find out, if you can, if he was an active Geranimite, and see if you can't join a Geranimite cell yourself. Since you might be recognized, you'll have to wear a disguise. Sure, but... No buts, Rach. You'll wear elevated shoes, and we'll have someone show you how to change your appearance. Rach shrugged. A lot of trouble for nothing. And you will shave off your mustache. Rach's eyes widened, and he sat there in appalled silence. Finally, he said, Shave my mustache? Clean as a whistle. No one would recognize you without it. But it can't be done. Like cutting off your... like castration. Your mustache will grow back, Rach. But it'll take years to reach this... Rach put his hand up as though to protect it. I'd rather die. Don't be melodramatic. I will get someone to supervise your disguise, and then you will go to Y by airjet. Buck up, Rach. It isn't the end of the world. Rach smiled wanly, and Seldon, a deeply troubled look on his face, watched him leave. A mustache could be easily regrown, but a son could not. Seldon knew perfectly well that he was sending Rach into danger. We all have our small illusions, and Cleon I was convinced that he was a person of democratic spirit. Therefore, the rare chance of talking to one of the underlings on the grounds excited him. It made him feel democratic. There was this gardener whom Seldon had spoken of, for instance. It would be fitting, even a pleasure, to reward him for his loyalty, and to do so himself. He arranged to meet the fellow in the spacious rose garden, which was in full bloom. "Ah, Gruber, how glad I am to meet a worthy and hard-working gardener." "Sire," Gruber's teeth were chattering, "I am not a man of many talents, but it is always my best I try to do on behalf of your gracious self." Of course. As you know, Gruber, the chief gardener is quite old and longs to retire. The responsibilities are becoming greater than even he can bear." "Sire, the chief gardener is much respected by all the gardeners. May he be spared for many years, that we can all come to him for the benefit of his wisdom and judgment." "Well said, Gruber. But you must know that is just mumbo-jumbo. He is not going to be spared. He himself requests retirement within the year, and I have granted him that. It remains to find a replacement." "Oh, sire, there are 50 men and women in this grand place who could be chief gardener." "I dare say, but my choice has fallen upon you." The Emperor smiled graciously. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Gruber would now, he expected, fall to his knees in an ecstasy of gratitude. He did not, and the Emperor frowned. "Sire, it is an honor that is too great for me, entirely." "Nonsense!" Cleon was offended that his judgment should be called into question. "It is done. The new job is what you deserved." Cleon nodded and stalked off. He was satisfied with this latest show of his benevolence. Of course, he could have used a little more gratitude from the fellow, a little more appreciation. But at least the task was done. And it was much easier to have this done than to settle the matter of the failing infrastructure. As for Gruber, he gazed after the departing emperor with a chill of sheer horror. He was going to be taken from the freedom of the open air and condemned to the constriction of 4 walls. Yet how could one refuse the emperor? Raich looked in the mirror of his Y hotel somberly. He did not like what he saw. His mustache was gone, his sideburns were shortened, his hair was clipped at the sides and back. He looked plucked. It was disgusting. Nor was he making any headway. Seldon had given him the security reports on Kaspalov's death, which he had studied. There wasn't much there, just that Kasparov had been murdered, and that the local security officers had come up with nothing of importance in connection with that murder. It seemed quite clear that the security officers attached little or no importance to it, anyway. Well, what was Raich to do? He was here at the hotel where Kasparov had lived during the days immediately before his murder. Somewhere in the hotel there might be someone who had something to do with that, or who knew someone who had. It seemed to Raich that he must make himself conspicuous. He must show an interest in Kasparov's death, and then someone would get interested in him and pick him up. It was dangerous, but if he could make himself sound harmless enough, they might not attack him immediately. Well, Raich looked at the time strip on his wrist. There would be people enjoying their pre-dinner aperitifs in the bar. He might as well join them and see what would happen, if anything. In some respects, Y could be quite puritanical. The drinks were not alcoholic, which meant that Raich, not liking the taste, could sip slowly and look around. He caught the eye of an attractive young woman several tables away. It was clear that Y's ways were not puritanical in every fashion. After a few moments, the young woman smiled slightly and rose. She drifted toward Raich's table, while Raich watched her speculatively. He could scarcely afford a side adventure just now. She stopped for a moment when she reached Raich, and then let herself slide smoothly into an adjacent chair. "Hello. You don't look like a regular here." Raich smiled. "I'm not. Do you know all the regulars?" "Just about." She smiled, unembarrassed. My name is Manella. What's yours? Rach was more regretful than ever. She was quite tall, had a milky complexion, and long, softly wavy hair that had distinct glints of dark red in it. Her clothing was not too garish, and if she had tried a little harder, she might have passed as a respectable woman of the not-too-hard-working class. My name doesn't matter, Manella. I don't have many credits. Oh, too bad. Manella made a face. I'll tell you what, Mr. Nameless. Sometimes it doesn't take any credits at all. Rach froze. He had been successful enough with women, but with his mustache. What could she see in his baby face? Tell you what, I had a friend living here a couple of weeks ago, and I can't find him. Since you know all the regulars, maybe you know him. His name is Kaspilov. Rach raised his voice slightly. Kaspilov. Manella stared at him blankly. I don't know anybody by that name. Too bad. He was a Geranimite. So am I. Again, a blank look. Do you know what a Geranimite is? She shook her head. No. Is it some kind of job? Rach felt disappointed. It would take too long to explain. It sounded like a dismissal, and Manella rose and drifted away. His eyes followed Manella automatically as she stopped at another table, where a man was seated by himself. A few words were exchanged, and she moved on. Too bad, but surely it was impossible for her to fail often. She was unquestionably desirable. Rach found himself thinking quite involuntarily of what the upshot would be if he, after all, could, and then he realized that he had been joined by someone else. It was the man to whom Manella had just spoken. The man looked at him with a glint of curiosity in his eyes. You were just speaking to a friend of mine. Rach could not help smiling broadly. She's a friendly person. Yes, she is, and a good friend of mine. I couldn't help overhearing what you said to her. Wasn't nothing wrong, I think. Not at all. But you called yourself a Geranimite. Rach's heart jumped. His remark to Manella had hit dead center after all. Rach did his best to look uneasy. Why do you ask, mister? Because I don't think you're old enough. I used to watch Jojo Geranim's speeches on holovision. Can you quote them? Rach shrugged. No, but I got the idea. You're a brave young man to talk openly about being a Geranimite. Some people don't like that. I'm told there's lots of Geranimites in Y. That may be. Is that why you came here? I'm looking for a job. Maybe another Geranimite would help me. There are Geranimites in Dol, too. Where are you from? There was no question that he recognized Rach's accent. That could not be disguised. I was born in Milimaru, but I lived mostly in Dol when I was growing up. Doing what? Nothing much. Going to school some. And why are you a Geranimite? Rach let himself heat up a bit. Because I think there should be more representative government in the Empire, more participation by the people, and more equality among the sectors and the worlds. So you're a Democrat. Is that what you call it? Rach let his head sink, as if in deep thought. I feel more at home as a Geranimite. Of course, as a Dalite, I just lived there a while. You're all for people's equalities and such things. The Dalites, being an oppressed group, would naturally think in that fashion. I hear that Y is pretty strong in Geranimite thinking. They're not oppressed. The Wyans are rebels, not so much Geranimite as anti-Cleon. I don't know nothing about that. I ain't against the Emperor. But you are for popular representation, aren't you? How important do you think your beliefs about democracy or Geranimite philosophy are? I'd fight for them if I thought it would do any good. There's a brave lad. So you came to Y to fight for your beliefs. I can't say I did. Came to look for a job, sir. Ain't easy to find no jobs these days. I ain't got no credits. Guy's gotta live. I agree. What's your name? The question shot out without warning, but Rach was ready for it. Blanchette, sir. First or last name? Only name, as far as I know. All right. I'll tell you what, Blanchette. The man took a small white triangle out of his pocket and pressed it in such a way as to produce a printed message on it. I'll tell you where to go. You take this with you, and it may get you a job. Raich took the card. He looked at the other man warily. What if they think I stole it? It can't be stolen. It has my sign on it, and now it has your name. And what if they ask me who you are? They won't. You say you want a job? There's your chance. He gave him another card. This is where you go. Thank you. The man made little dismissing gestures with his hand. Raich rose and left, and wondered what he was getting into. Up and down, up and down, up and down. Gleb Andren watched Gambaldine Namardi trudging up and down. Namardi stopped, as though he felt Andren's eyes boring into his back. He turned around. If you're going to lecture me again on Kasparov, don't bother. I had no choice. Very well. You had no choice. Namardi raised his hands, rubbing his fingers together. We are ready for the next step now. I presume that you intend a strike on the Imperial Palace grounds, said Andren, only half believing what he was saying. Of course. What else is there to do? Andren felt dizzy, as if he'd fallen into a spinning vortex. It's odd, Chief, but I've been waiting to tell you something that I now see fits in perfectly. What are you talking about? I've found a man for you, a young man, very naive, a quite likable fellow, the kind you feel you can trust. He thinks Geranum was the greatest thing since Dalite Cokeicers. I'm sure we can easily talk him into doing anything for the cause. If we do everything right, he will dispose of our dear Emperor Cleon for us. Namardi's face blazed into anger. What? Are you mad? Why would we want to kill Cleon? He's the facade behind which we can rule. We need him as a figurehead. Think a bit, will you? Who destroyed Geranum? Who destroyed our hopes 10 years ago? It was that mathematician. It is Hari Seldon we must destroy. Manila brushed the hair out of her eyes and smiled up at Raich. I told you it wouldn't cost you any credits. Raich blinked and scratched at his bare shoulder. But are you going to ask me for some now? She smiled rather impishly. Why should I? Why shouldn't you? Because I'm allowed to take my own pleasure sometimes. With me? There's no one else here. There was a long pause, and then Manella said soothingly, Besides, you don't have that many credits anyway. How's the job? Ain't much, but better than nothing. Lots better. Did you tell that guy to get me one? Manella shook her head slowly. You mean Gleb Andren? I didn't tell him to do anything. I just said he might be interested in you. Is he going to be annoyed because you and I... Why should he? None of his business. None of yours, either. What's he do? I mean, what does he work at? I don't think he works at anything. He's rich. He's a relative of the old mayor's. Of why? Right. He doesn't like the imperial government. He says Cleon should. She stopped suddenly. I'm talking too much. Don't you go repeating anything I say. Me? I ain't heard you say nothing at all. And I ain't going to. All right. And what about Andren? Is he high up in Geranumite business? I wouldn't know. Oh, said Raich, trying not to sound annoyed. Manella looked at him shrewdly. Why are you so interested? I want to get in with them. I figure I'll get higher up that way. Better job, more credits, you know? Maybe Andren will help you. He likes you. I know that much. Could you make him like me more? I can try. I don't know why he shouldn't. I like you. I like you more than I like him. Thank you, Manella. I like you, too. A lot." He ran his hand down the side of her body and wished ardently that he could concentrate more on her and less on his assignment. "Gleb Andoran," said Hari Seldon, wearily rubbing his eyes. "And who is he?" Doris Venable's mood was as cold as it had been every day since Rach had left. "Someone I admit I ought to have known about. He's a member of the Y mayoralty family, the most prominent member, in fact. So the security people have kept tabs on him. They think he has ambitions, but is too much of a playboy to do anything about them." "And why are you interested in this, what's-his-name?" "Gleb Andoran. Because I received a roundabout message from Rach." Dora's eyes flashed. "Why didn't you tell me? Is he all right?" "As far as I know. In any case, he has made contact with Andoran." "And the Geranimites, too?" "I don't think so. The Geranimite movement was predominantly lower class, a proletariat movement, so to speak. And Andoran is an aristocrat of aristocrats. What would he be doing with Geranimites if they still exist?" "If he's of the Y mayoralty family, he might aspire to the imperial throne, might he not?" "They've been aspiring for generations." "Then he might be using the Geranimites as a stepping stone, don't you think?" "If they exist." Seldon paused. "One more thing. Rach seems to be involved with a woman who knows Andoran and through whom he thinks he may get important information. I'm telling you this now so that you won't accuse me afterward of keeping anything from you." Doris frowned. "A woman?" "One, I gather, who knows a great many men who will talk to her unwisely sometimes under intimate circumstances." "One of those," her frown deepened. "I don't like the thought of Rach." Come, Rach is 30 years old and undoubtedly has much experience. You can leave this woman, or any woman, I think, safely to Rach's good sense." He turned toward Doris with a look so worn, so weary, and said, "Do you think I like this? Do you think I like any of this?" And Doris could find nothing to say. Rach kept his eyes down. He had taken a quick look at Namardi, and it was all he needed. He had met the man 10 years before, and one look was more than enough. Namardi had changed little. His face was a trifle more gaunt, his hair was flecked with gray, but his thin-lipped mouth was set in the same harsh line, and his dark eyes, as brilliantly dangerous as ever, seemed to devour Rach. Namardi turned to Andoran, who stood uneasily to one side. "This is the man, then." Andoran nodded. Namardi abruptly turned to Rach. "Your name?" "Planchette, sir." "You believe in our cause?" "Yes, sir. I am a Democrat." "You willing to undertake risks for the cause?" "Any risk, sir." "You will do as you're told." "I will follow orders." "You know anything about gardening?" Rach hesitated. "No, sir." "You're a Trantorian, then, born under the dome?" "I was born in Milimaru, sir, and I was brought up in Dal." "Very well." Then to Andoran, "Take him out. Deliver him temporarily to the men waiting there. Then come back, Andoran. I want to speak to you." When Andoran returned, a profound change had come over Namardi. His eyes were glittering, and his mouth was twisted into a feral grin. "Andoran, the gods are with us to an extent I couldn't have imagined." "Well, I told you the man was suitable for our purposes." "Far more suitable than you think. You know, of course, the tale of how Hari Seldon sent his son to set the trap into which Geranum, against my advice, fell?" "Yes," Andoran nodded wearily. "I know the story." "I saw that boy only that once, but his image burned into my brain. That Planchette of yours is Rach, the foster son of Hari Seldon." Andoran paled and held his breath for a moment. "Are you sure of that, Chief?" "As sure as I am that you're standing here in front of me and that you have introduced an enemy into our midst." "I had no idea." "Don't get nervous. I consider it the best thing you have ever done in your idle aristocratic life. If I had not known who he was, he'd have been a spy in our midst. But since I know who he is, it won't work that way. Instead, we now have everything. Namarty rubbed his hands together in delight and, haltingly, as if he realized how far out of character it was for him, laughed. Manella was thoughtful. "I guess I won't be seeing you any more, Planchette." Raich was drying himself after his shower. "Why not?" "Gleb Andron doesn't want me to." "Why not?" Manella shrugged her smooth shoulders. "He says you have important work to do and no more time to fool around. Maybe he means you'll get a better job." Raich stiffened. "What kind of work? Did he mention anything in particular?" "No, but he said you would be going to the Imperial sector." "What else does he say?" "Why do you ask?" She frowned a bit. "He always asks about you, too." "What do you tell him about me?" "Not much. Just that you're a very decent sort of guy." Raich was getting dressed. "So, it's goodbye, then?" "For a while, I suppose. Gleb may change his mind. Of course, I'd like to go to the Imperial sector, if he'd take me. I've never been there." "I have. I've never been there either." "It's got the biggest buildings, the nicest places, and the fanciest restaurants. And that's where the rich people live. I'd like to meet some rich people, besides Gleb, I mean. Besides, I think Gleb is getting tired of me." Raich felt compelled to say, "No one could get tired of you," and then found, a little to his own confusion, that he meant it. "That's what men always say, but you'd be surprised. Anyway, it's been good, you and I, Planchette. Take care of yourself, and who knows? We may see each other again." Raich nodded. There was no way in which he could express his feelings. He turned his mind in other directions. He had to find out what the Namarty people were planning. All he had to go on was that odd question about gardening. Nor could he get any further information back to Seldon. He had been under close scrutiny since his meeting with Namarty, and all avenues of communication were cut off. Hari Seldon was not having a good day. He had not heard from Raich. He had no idea what was happening. Aside from his natural concern for Raich's safety, there was his uneasiness over what might be planned. A direct attack on the palace itself was totally out of the question. Security there was far too tight. But if so, what else could be planned that would be sufficiently effective? The whole thing was keeping him awake at night and distracted by day. The communications signal light on his desk flashed. "First Minister, your 2 o'clock appointment, sir." "What 2 o'clock appointment is this?" Mandel Gruber, the gardener. He has the necessary certification." Seldon remembered. "Yes, send him in." This was no time to see Gruber, but he had agreed to it in a moment of weakness. The man had seemed distraught. "Come in, Gruber." Gruber stood before him, head ducking mechanically, eyes darting this way and that. Then the words came out in a panting rush. "First Minister."
"What is it, Gruber?
"It is Chief Gardener.
Why are you so
I am to
unhappy?"
be. The blessed
Gruber was
Emperor
silent for a
himself
moment.
told me so." "Yes, I have heard of that. But that surely isn't what's troubling you. Tell me what is troubling you." "First Minister, it is the very post and promotion that's troubling me. It is something I cannot manage, for I am not qualified." "We are convinced you are." Gruber grew agitated. "And is it in an office I will have to sit? I can't sit in an office. I could not go out in the open air and work with the plants and animals. I would be imprisoned, First Minister." Seldon's eyes opened wide. "No such thing, Gruber. You needn't stay in the office longer than you have to. You could wander around the grounds freely, supervising everything. You will have all the outdoors you want, and you will merely spare yourself the hard work." "I want the hard work, First Minister, and it's no chance at all they will let me come out of the office. I have watched the present Chief Gardener. He couldn't leave his office, though he wanted to ever so. He watches things on holovision, as though you could tell anything about growing, living things from pictures. It's not for me, First Minister." "Come, Gruber, be a man. You'll get used to it." Gruber shook his head. "First off, I will have to deal with all the new gardeners. I'll be buried. It is a job I do not want and must not have, First Minister. Can't you speak to the Emperor and explain that if he wants to reward me, he can leave me as I am?" Seldon leaned back in his chair. "Gruber, I would do that for you if I could, but I must explain something to you, and I can only hope that you will understand it. The Emperor, in theory, is absolute ruler of the Empire. In actual fact, there is very little he can do. I run the Empire right now, much more than he does, and there is very little I can do, too. But what does this to do with my case? Because there is only one place where the Emperor is really absolute ruler, and that is over the Imperial grounds. If I were to say, 'Take back your decision on Gruber, your Imperial Majesty,' he would be much more likely to relieve me of my duties than to take back his decision. That might be a good thing for me, but it wouldn't help you any." "Does that mean there's no way things could be changed?" "That's exactly what it means. I'm sorry, but now I have really spent all the time with you that I am able to spare." Gruber rose to his feet. In his hands he twisted his green gardening cap. There was more than a suspicion of tears in his eyes. "Thank you, First Minister. I know you would like to help. You're a good man, First Minister." He turned and left, sorrowing. Seldon looked after him thoughtfully and shook his head. Multiply Gruber's woes by a quadrillion, and you would have the woes of all the people of the 25 million worlds of the Empire. Psychohistory could not save one man. Could it save a quadrillion? He shook his head again. Then, suddenly stiffened, he shouted into his communications wire in sudden, wild abandon, "Get that gardener back! Get him back here right now!" "What's this about new gardeners?" exclaimed Seldon. This time he did not ask Gruber to sit down. Gruber's eyes blinked rapidly. New gardeners. You said all the new gardeners. Those were your words. What new gardeners?" Gruber was astonished. "Sure, if there is a new chief gardener, there will be new gardeners. It is the custom." "I have never heard of this. What's it all about?" "Well, gardeners are never discharged, so by the time a new chief gardener is ready for his duties, at least half the staff is aged and beyond their best years. They are all pensioned off generously, and new gardeners are brought in." Seldon's forehead was creased in concentration. "Where do the new gardeners come from?" "From any of a million worlds. We want a variety of horticultural knowledge. Any citizen of the Empire can qualify." "From Trontor, too?" "No, not from Trontor. You can't get a gardener out of Trontor. The parks they have here under the dome aren't gardens, they're potted plants." "All right, Gruber. I will now give you a job. It will be up to you to get me the names of every new gardener scheduled to arrive over the coming weeks. Everything about them. Name, world, reference number, education, experience, everything. I want it all here on my desk as quickly as possible." Alone again, Seldon barked into his communications wire. "Cancel all appointments for the rest of the afternoon." He then let his body flop in his chair, feeling every bit of his 50 years. For decades, security had been built up around the Imperial Palace grounds, more and more impenetrable, as each new layer and each new device was added. And every once in a while, hordes of strangers were led into the grounds. No questions asked, probably, but one. Can you garden? The stupidity involved was too colossal to grasp, and he had barely caught it in time. Or had he? Was he, even now, too late? Gleb Andren gazed at Namarti through half-closed eyes. Namarti's face seemed to shine with malignant glee. "There will be a group of gardeners entering the Imperial Palace grounds soon," he savored the thought. "Men and women, enough to serve as a mask for the handful of our operatives who will accompany them. Among them will be you and Planchette. And what will make you and Planchette unusual is that you will be carrying blasters." "Surely we'll be stopped at the gates and held for questioning." Andren's polite expression masked his malice. You won't be stopped. That's been arranged." Marty had missed the malice. "Seldon himself will hurry out to greet the new gardeners and welcome them to the grounds." "You're sure of that, I suppose?" "Of course I am. He will be told at the last minute that his foster son is among the new gardeners, and it will be impossible for Seldon to refrain from coming out to see him. And when Seldon appears, Planchette will raise his blaster. Our people will raise the cry of treason in the confusion and hurly-burly. Planchette will kill Seldon, and then you will kill Planchette. You will then drop your blaster and leave. There are those who will help you leave. It's been arranged." "Is it absolutely necessary to kill Planchette?" Marty frowned. "Why? When Planchette recovers, do you wish him to tell the authorities all he knows about us? Besides, it's a family feud we're arranging. It will look as though the two had fired simultaneously, as though Seldon had given orders that if his son made any hostile move, he was to be shot down. We will see to it that the family angle will be given full publicity. The people of Toronto will surely be repelled by the sheer wickedness of the deed. That, piled on top of all the inefficiencies and breakdowns they've been witnessing and living through, will raise the cry for a new government. And then we'll step in. Just like that." "No, not just like that. I don't live in a dream world. There is likely to be some interim government, but it will fail. We'll see to it that it fails, and we'll come out in the open and revive the old Geronimite arguments that the Trantorians have never forgotten. And in time, in not too much time, I will be First Minister." "And I?" "Will eventually be the Emperor." "You mean the new figurehead?" "Is that what you plan to be? A figurehead?" "I plan to be the Emperor. I supplied advances of credit when you had none. I supplied the cadre when you had none. I supplied the respectability when you needed to build a large organization here and why. But the chance of all this working is small. The risk is enormous." "Isn't it worth it to you? You're playing for the imperial throne." "And what risk are you taking, Chief? You will remain here, quite comfortable, and wait to hear the news." Marty's lip curled. "What a fool you are, Andron. What an emperor you will make. Do you suppose I take no risk because I will be here? If the gambit fails, if the plot miscarries, if some of our people are taken, do you think they won't tell everything they know? Risk? I run a worse risk than any of you, just sitting here doing nothing. It boils down to this, Andron. Do you or do you not wish to be emperor?" "I wish to be emperor." Raich had no trouble seeing that he was being treated with special care. The whole group of would-be gardeners was now quartered in one of the hotels in the imperial sector. Andron, without being too obvious about it, had managed to keep him apart from the others. Raich wondered why. It depressed him. In fact, he had been feeling somewhat depressed since he had left Y. Andron was himself wearing rough clothes. He would be playing the part of a gardener as a way of running the show, whatever the show might be. Raich felt ashamed that he had not been able to penetrate the nature of that show. He also missed Manella terribly. It occurred to him that missing her might be the cause of his depression, though, to tell the truth, what he was feeling now, as he was finishing lunch with Andron, was almost despair, though he could think of no cause for it. Manella. Raich was desperate enough to ask a foolish question. "Mr. Andron, I keep wondering if maybe you brought Manella Dubanqua along with you, here to the Imperial sector." Andron laughed gently. "Can you imagine Manella doing any gardening? No, no. She is one of those women invented for our quiet moments. I do ask, Planchette." Raich shrugged. "I don't know. It's sort of dull around here. I sort of thought—" Andron watched him carefully. Finally he said, "Once this is over, there will be other women, plenty 50 of them. When will this be over? Soon. And you're going to be part of it in a very important way. Andron watched Rach narrowly. How important? Aren't I going to be just a gardener? You'll be more than that, Planchette. You'll be going in with a blaster. I never held a blaster. There's nothing to it. You lift it, you point it, you close the contact, and someone dies. I can't kill anyone. I thought you were one of us, that you would do anything for the cause. But I didn't mean kill. Rach couldn't seem to collect his thoughts. How would he be able to alert the Imperial Guard before the killing would be carried out? Andron's face hardened suddenly. You must kill. Rach gathered all his strength. No, I ain't gonna kill nobody. That's final. Planchette, you will do as you are told. Not murder. Even murder. How you gonna make me? I shall simply tell you to. Rach felt dizzy. What made Andron so confident? He shook his head. Now, Andron said, we've been feeding you, Planchette, ever since you left Y. Rach felt the horror rise within him. He suddenly understood. Disparance. Exactly. You're a sharp devil, Planchette. It's illegal. Yes, of course. So's murder. Rach knew about disparance. It was a chemical modification of a perfectly harmless tranquilizer. The modified form, however, did not produce tranquility, but despair. As though reading Rach's mind, Andron said, you can't fight the chemical, and the more hopeless you feel, the more effective the drug. No chance. Now Marty knows that you are Rach Seldon, and at my direction, you are going to kill your father. Rach muttered. Not before I kill you. He rose from his chair. Andron rose too and backed away. He was holding a weapon. I came prepared. I have been informed of your prowess as a Heliconian twister, and there will be no hand-to-hand combat. He looked down at his weapon. This is not a blaster. I can't afford to have you killed before you accomplish your task. It is a neuronic whip. I will aim at your left shoulder, and believe me, the pain will be so excruciating that the world's greatest stoic would not be able to endure it. Rach, who had been advancing slowly, stopped abruptly. He felt the drug-induced despair settle over him. His vision was turning double, and he could think of nothing to say. Rach only knew that he would have to do what Andron would tell him to do. He had played the game, and he had lost. No. Hari Seldon was almost violent. I don't want you out there, Doris. Doris Venabile stared back at him with an expression as firm as his own. Then I won't let you go either, Harry. I must be there. It is not your place. The chief gardener greets the new people. But Gruber can't do it. He's a broken man. He must have an assistant of some sort, or let the old chief gardener do it. The old chief gardener is too ill. Besides, Seldon hesitated, there are ringers among the gardeners, Trantorians. They're here for some reason. I have the names of every one of them. Have them taken into custody, then. It's simple. Why are you making it so complex? Because we don't know why they're here. We must know enough of what they're doing to be able to make the proper punishment stick. I don't want to get 12 men and women on what is essentially a misdemeanor charge. They'll plead desperation, the need for a job. Besides, one of the 12 is Rach. What? Why are you surprised? He must have some sort of plan to put a spoke in the wheel. But I want to be there too. I want to be in a position to help him if I can. That's risky. It's risky for Rach. Risks are something we have to take. There's more riding on this than individual lives. It is a heartless thing to say. You think I have no heart? Even if it broke, my concern would have to be with psycho— Don't say it! I understand. Doris turned away, as if in pain. Seldon thought, and I hope I'm right. If he weren't, she would never forgive him. Far worse, he would never forgive himself, psychohistory or not. The gardeners were lined up beautifully, feet spread apart, hands behind their backs, every one in a natty green uniform, loosely fitted and with wide pockets. There was very little gender differential, and one could only guess that some of the shorter ones were women. The hoods covered whatever hair they had. Facing them was Mandel Gruber. He was trembling. His wide-opened eyes glazed. Hari Seldon's lips tightened. If Gruber could but manage to say, "The Emperor's gardeners greet you all," that would be enough. Seldon himself would then take over. His eyes swept over the new contingent, and he located Rach. His heart jumped a bit. It was the mustacheless Rach in the front row, standing more rigid than the rest, staring straight ahead. His eyes did not move to meet Seldon's. Good, thought Seldon. He's giving nothing away. Gruber muttered a weak welcome, and Seldon jumped in. He advanced with an easy stride, putting himself immediately before Gruber, and said, "Thank you, Chief Gardener. Men and women, gardeners of the Emperor, you are to undertake an important task." He had by this time moved almost stealthily to a point directly in front of Rach, who remained motionless, unblinking,